Guess what? It's the Oscars on Sunday. How amazing is that?
Woo!
Yes.
Happens every year.
It's electric in here.
Can you believe it?
So excited.
All this forced energy.
Yay, Oscars.
The great thing about the Oscars this year is it's all about taking part. It's a little bit like the Premier League. Is that it doesn't matter who wins, so we don't need to go on about it.
No,
It's all about taking part. Today we've assembled an amazing sort of group of people to talk about the Oscars. We've got Hanna Flint.
Hello.
We've got Chris Hewitt.
Hi.
And we've got Diyora Shadijanova.
Hi.
Is that all right?
I mean, you shook when you said your name. You went, Diyora Shadijanova.
This is like 1917. This is a one-take deal. We can't go back. That's it. The name's in the can now.
You can just say Diyora if you want.
Diyora, okay.
You can be like Madonna.
Yeah.
There's only one.
Yeah, or Sinbad. Oh.
So, first of all, we've had the BAFTAs with the Oscars on Sunday. Who watched Joaquin Phoenix's speech about diversity?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you think about that?
It was nice, but I think... No, it was good. It was obviously really good to have that. But I also think it would be good to see an action plan. You know, it's very well to say we should have more diversity. I mean, we have that conversation every single year. We all know that. So what are we going to do about it? And I think that's why people are... I think people are happy that he made the speech, and I don't think anyone has, like, a problem with him as an individual, but it's more like, in the system, how do we solve that problem?
Yeah.
I kind of feel, though, it's rare to get a white male actor to talk on it in that way, go so hard on it. I mean, that speech was... He called himself out. He called the whole culture of white complicity out. You know, we've spent the last 2 weeks having to listen to white media and white figures basically gaslight the existence of systemic racism and say, no, it doesn't exist. So for him to come out and use that speech in such a...
And that silence after.
And, you know, he took his time about it, and with every word you felt it and he meant it. And, you know, he was, like he said, you know, I'm not saying I'm innocent of this. I'm guilty of it as well. So I think actually, you know, compared to other speeches we've seen where it's talking about inclusion riders, as Frances McDormand did and stuff, I think having a white male actor who has starred in probably the most white male raging movie of the year.
Well, I think that was the biggest shock of it all.
Yeah. But,
that movie is extraordinarily white.
Yeah.
I mean, my God.
I mean, what was the joke on SNL? It's like, it's the only movie that made himself whiter. Or is it that what Graham Norton said? No, that's what Graham Norton said. He said that. I was like, well done to that. So I think it's really important. I think you're right, though. It's all words at this point. I'm really interested to see what is his next projects. I know that Jeremy O. Harris, who's a playwright who wrote Slave Play, did Zola, which is just screened at Sundance, said, I shouldn't talk about this, but actually I had a meeting with Joaquin Phoenix recently about working on a project together. So obviously behind the scenes, he's already putting the steps into action. But again, this is the guy who played Jesus. So, you know, he's only ever worked with one female director. So I'm really glad that it's taken him this long to come to this conclusion. Better late than never. So I can only hope that we're actually going to see some actual changes, especially behind the scenes, about who he's going to work with.
But doesn't Hollywood move at a glacial pace? And so I think change is coming, but it's coming very, very slowly.
Yeah.
You know, it's going to get to the point where something like Black Panther, the seismic shock of Black Panther on the industry, I think that'll take a couple of years to really transform things behind the scenes at a very significant level as well. But 10 years ago, Black Panther would have been a completely different film. So things are changing, I think, very, very slowly. It is good to see Joaquin Phoenix throw his weight behind it, though. In terms of what Hanna was saying about, and Diyora, about the actual film he was in and how white that was, do you think that criticism is justified? Do you think it was toxic in any way? Do you think it was problematic? Yeah, I do. I have slight issues with Joker. I have slight issues with it being nominated for 11 Oscars. It's going to win at least 2. We know that. You know, he's going to turn up next week already clutching the Oscar. That's in the bag. The film itself, I do feel that it can be read both ways, but it can be read as basically an incel manual in a weird way. And I think that's probably not what Todd Phillips and Scott Silver, the writer, set out to do. I think they actually set out to criticize incels. And I think if you look at the behaviour of Joaquin Phoenix in that movie, I don't think it's condoned at any point. He's quite clearly psychopathic. He's quite clearly off the edge. But that doesn't stop people from interpreting the movie in that way and seeing the movie the way they want to see it, and they see it basically as a manifesto in a strange way.
It's the same way people saw Fight Club. You know, everyone had Tyler Durden posters on the wall, but actually the intention of the original book was totally not about that. It was a criticism of it. But I think this is also, you know, with that movie, when you have Brad Pitt playing Tyler Durden, Brad Pitt, the most gorgeous man in the world. Like, I mean, if you had Paul Giamatti playing that character...
Paul Giamatti is Tyler Durden. Now we're talking. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Fight Club. Like, that would have been great.
But I think it's like, you know, I think sometimes you see someone like Brad Pitt playing Tyler Durden and think, oh, God, he's gorgeous. Like, this is what I want to be like. Joaquin Phoenix, he lost a lot of weight, looks a bit awkward, but he's still Joaquin Phoenix playing Joker. I think my issue with the Joker is that I love comic book movies, and I think it basically stripped everything that made it a comic book out of it, and you could have just called it Jeff, and it would have worked without any of the Joker backstory, because it's not really about... I think sometimes when you have backstories, I kind of like the fact that you don't have much of a backstory. I know it's kind of implied based on the Killing Joke Batman series, but I think, you know, it's like the same way I wasn't really that much of a fan of Maleficent. Sometimes let's just let bad guys be bad guys and stop giving them this kind of platform and say, actually, they're from a really tragic background and this is why they've become who they are. It's like, oh, come on, let's just, like, have them being bad for the sake of being bad, like Heath Ledger, who, again, still is the best
and had no backstory.
Love it.
In terms of the way it's been adopted, I always think you can tell how things have been received by who adopts the star as their avatar on Twitter. So if a lot of trolls sort of adopt it, you know, you're in trouble. But like what Chris was saying about what Chris was saying about what Todd Phillips intended, I don't think he helped himself with the comments he made
about the woke culture, and he said that it's killed comedy. Yeah, I mean, when
I'm sorry, The Hangover 3 killed comedy.
Right. So when you hear a director say something like that, you can't help but think that the work they've just produced is somehow a commentary on that. And of course, then people are going to be like, is this about incels? Is this a wider comment on woke culture and, you know, that we take things too seriously? I mean, I personally, watching it, was really confused because I thought that the acting was phenomenal. Like, it really was amazing, and I think you can see why people liked it. Did I have a problem with it having so much spotlight? Yeah, definitely, because I think we've seen this type of film so many times before, and, you know, the humanisation of, like, the mass murderer and making us feel this much sympathy for someone as deranged as him. And you just sort of step back and think, why? Like, why are we doing this? Like, what is the point? Like, what are we learning from this? And just from that aspect, I did think it was a waste of my time. And of course people can be like, it's going to incite violence. And I definitely do see that. I don't think watching a single film is going to go and make someone also become a mass murderer. But at this stage, you also don't know. I don't know. I felt really conflicted about it.
It gives them something to hide behind. It gives them an avatar to point at, literally. As you say, a friend of mine got abused on Instagram the other day, and he posted the exchange. Someone slid into his DMs with the C word, which is nice. And lo and behold, it was a Joker avatar. And I just went, yep, check. You know, you can write that guy off. And it gives him something to hide behind and point to, you know, as a hero. And with that, we don't need that.
Yeah, like, I just didn't really understand that.
Well, he's not a hero, though. That's the point. I don't really get it. It's like, why is he your hero when he's actually a villain?
And they idolise him even before the film. Like, do you not get it, guys? This is the Joker. He's, I mean, the bad guy.
Yeah.
Don't idolise him. Idolise the guy who dresses up as the Bat.
In terms of talking about diversity, two of the films, The Irishman and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, they've been criticised for the number of lines that female sort of
characters
get. How do you feel about that? Do you think that's fair, or...?
You know what? I think there's two arguments being conflated here, because there are movies that you can watch, like Logan, where you have X-23 who barely speaks in it, but you would not say that that is not a phenomenal role for women, right? But then you have a film like Once Upon a Time, which I personally felt that whole narrative with Sharon Tate, it was created this ethereal being where all she's pretty much doing is dancing around, and, you know, all the focus for me was on her body and her beauty, which most of the things that Sharon Tate said about her legacy, she didn't want to be known, she didn't want to be the bombshell. I think that perpetuated it. So I think it actually, you know, if they haven't got words in a movie where there is a lot of talking. Like Quentin Tarantino, his dialogue is like legendary. We all know it. So I think the idea that you're kind of
not for Sharon Tate.
not for Sharon Tate though, yeah, and that's the thing. So and the same with Anna Paquin and An Irishman. I get if it's part of the characterization, but what are they doing? What is the meaningfulness in the silence? And I don't think what they were doing in the silence was enough compared to the male co-stars and characters.
Yeah.
That's what I felt.
Yeah, I agree. I read an article that said that her supporting role, that she should have been nominated for an Oscar, and she maybe even should have won because of the impact of the silences, where I just thought, she's a great actress, you're wasting her. Give her something to do, other than a look and a gesture, and at least incorporate her into De Niro's life in that movie in a meaningful way.
By the way, I mean, I suppose I should do a mea culpa in that, like, in the same way Joaquin Phoenix admitted that he was responsible. Like, I've not asked you as a white male, like, because you're the minority here.
Yes, white male.
Are you feeling okay?
Feeling a little bit hot on the collar here.
Do you feel represented?
I just,
We've got the token white male, guys.
you tick your boxes, Noel. It's totally fine. I am happy to be represented. Go see Joker.
In terms of Tarantino and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where do you think that sits in terms of his film? Do you think he deserves to win that?
I'm laughing because we just did a Empire podcast ranking his movies, and so I know exactly where it sits for us. I think it's mid-level Tarantino.
Right.
Although I think it's one of those movies that I've only seen it a couple of times. I think it's one of those ones, if I go back 3 or 4 times, it'll become richer and warmer and deeper with every single viewing. Because it's un-Tarantino-esque until the final cavalcade of violence in the last 10 minutes. It's a hangout movie, and what he does is interesting. He's never really done it before, where he just creates characters you want to hang out with. Jackie Brown does it to an extent, but there's still a bit of a thriller plot there. Whereas
Maybe
these
Pulp
two
Fiction
guys,
does it a bit.
Pulp Fiction does it a little bit. But every now and again, someone does get shot in the face.
Yeah.
This leaves it until the last 10 minutes of a 2.5-hour movie. But I think it's a really, really good film, and his dialogue, apart from maybe Sharon Tate, his dialogue is still up there with the best. And so I think, we may not be doing predictions, but I think it'll win. Just
a quick question. Was this the one that everyone... I haven't seen it. Was this one where everyone watched and they were like, what was that last 10 minutes about?
But that's his kind of textbook Tarantino, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, it's just... I mean... Not to give it away, but it's been out for a while. But it's kind of that whole, like... Because there's a historical narrative, and it's based on things, and it's recreating, what's it, kind of revisionist history, kind of like what would happen in this other kind of world. And this is why... Sorry to segue on that, but this is why I think that you could watch this movie and take Sharon Tate out, and then at the end, you could still have that moment at the end and not have Margot Robbie appear, and it still work as a movie. And I think that's why I don't think her role is big enough, because if you can do that... I think you bring... Because in the end of Inglourious Basterds, you don't see Hitler until the end, until like the whole thing, and it's like, it could work.
With Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it's about a much more specific event. And watching it the first time, not to give too much away, but as it got closer and closer and closer to the events of what is in real life an absolutely horrific event, I just started to shrivel up and die inside, because even though we hadn't really seen that much of Sharon Tate in the movie, she still, as you say, presented this as sort of ethereal beauty, this almost goddess, this almost paragon of virtue and perfection in a way, and you just didn't want anything bad to happen to her. And as he tightens his screws towards the end, even almost going minute by minute like some sort of true crime documentary, it becomes unbearably tense. And then he does his Gonzo Tarantino thing, and all the tension is released in a very unorthodox way.
And honestly, you're just screaming. I was like, yes, use the dog can. Sorry.
That's
I'm
cryptic now,
not going to
but
watch it.
honestly, if you
I don't really want to watch it.
No context spoiler.
No, absolutely. Use the dog can!
A film that did have quite a few lines for women was Little Women.
Yes.
What did you think about that?
I mean, I thought it was amazing. I was really, really shocked that Greta wasn't nominated. I thought also the way it was obviously done with the different time cuts as well. It was just a really nice, warming thing to watch, right before, the Christmas period.
She did weave quite a few sort of topical issues in there as well.
Yes, that's what was so great about it, because it felt... at the same time, it was contemporary, but also historical. So you had all these, obviously amazing sets and costumes, but then it was so relatable. And I think that's what made it amazing.
There's a moment in it, and I remember there's a bit where They already released this clip, by the way, online, so I feel like I can talk about it.
Use a dog can.
But yeah, you should see it.
They're not even Little Women.
Flamethrower. Give me the book deal.
They're life size. That's the big spoiler.
There's a bit in it where Saoirse Ronan, as Jo March, she's talking to Marmee and basically saying like, I just feel that women, we're more than just, you know, hearts and love.
Yes.
And there's so much more about us. And like, I think it was the first time that I just felt that, like in my bones, just like that feeling of wanting to be loved and feel that way and not feel lonely, but also not wanting to kind of sacrifice your ambition and your career just to find a guy. And I just, for me, as a single 9-year-old, 31, guys, if you're watching, I am single. I'm not on the apps, but DM me.
But
my DMs are open, actually. But there's a bit...
No Joker avatars, please.
Yeah.
Right now.
Jake Gyllenhaal avatars accepted. Or just Jake Gyllenhaal. Jake, if you're watching. But yeah, it felt so relatable. And there's also another scene where Florence Pugh is talking to Laurie and talking about the economics of marriage and actually saying, like, why shouldn't I get a man when I actually have to kind of, you know, I have to kind of do all this stuff. I have to be the perfect woman and all that. And suddenly, why shouldn't I find that person when I can't even get a job? So that felt all really relatable. And I loved it. Actually, I cried my eyes out. Chris Cooper.
There was a little bit of controversy about the ending. About like it was ambiguous in a way, wasn't it? Like it didn't have the traditional sort of like happy ending. It sort of kind of left it open.
But I like that.
Yeah.
Life doesn't have happy endings, Noz.
Yeah. If La La Land taught us anything, I like that because again, it's the intertextuality of like this is a book that she's written from her personal experience, and then you're kind of like at the end you're like, oh wait a sec, is this true, is this not true, what's she going for? I quite like that twist of the ending. Also, you want to make, if you're good, I mean, Little Women, how many times has it been adapted now?
Right, it's been adapted so many times, and I think probably people were like, why are we adapting this again?
I honestly thought that before it came out.
And so did I, and then you see it and you understand why, and it's just so refreshing to see it done in a way that does make it so contemporary. And I think, yeah, again, as I mentioned, you know, the jumping from different times made it really interesting, and the open ending as well.
Yeah. I think, though, one thing I will say, as a slight criticism, as we're talking about diversity, I mean, obviously, you know, it's all white cast, and it's set during the Civil War period where, you know, slavery was still going on and all that, and it's like, it's really great to make some feminist statements, but again, it's not intersectional. It doesn't relate to the fact that, you know, if you're a black woman back then, or mixed race, you know, you didn't have those same rights. So it's kind of interesting kind of how it's a little bit white feministy in that sort of sense. So, and this is what happens when you constantly adapt the same kind of tales. You know, we have Emma coming out, which is another. Jane Austen's constantly being adapted. Shakespeare's constantly being adapted. That's why I liked Personal History of David Copperfield, which showed that you can do colourblind casting. You can take something which is fictional history, and actually, when it comes down to it, does it really matter what colour their skin is?
Exactly,
it gives
because
opportunities.
every time this happens, we have the same conversation over and over again, like, oh, but did you know, people of colour exist in those times? And
They did.
Like, yes, of course they did.
Yes.
And you know what? Even if they didn't, well, they did. Even if they didn't. So why can't we cast people of colour in those?
You do it in
roles?
Theatre. I mean, I spoke to Josie Rourke, who directed Mary Queen of Scots, and she hired Adrian Lester to play Lord Rochester. Anyway,
He played Henry V at one point, didn't he?
Well, on the
Lester?
stage, yeah.
on the stage, yeah.
But she said, you know, I'm making a film where it's set during the period where Shakespeare was writing, and who do I get? Who's the best person for the job? Adrian Lester, who's played Othello, played Hamlet. Like, he's one of the greatest Shakespearean actors out there. Just because he's black, am I not going to cast him in this movie? And it's interesting because when you talk about historical inaccuracies, more people have an issue with the colour of someone's skin, not the fact that they're wearing denim dresses. Like whatever century, or the fact that Margot Robbie's Australian, or that they all got lovely teeth when back then they would have had wooden teeth. So if your focus on historical inaccuracies is based on someone's skin, that basically says a lot more about you and your prejudices than the actual movie.
Yeah.
So,
Chris, when you were watching 1917, were you distracted by a brown face halfway through?
Well, I had to leave the theatre to write a letter of protest. As you know, I was furious. This is historically inaccurate. I railed inaccurately. No, absolutely not at all. Not at all. You know, just didn't pay any attention to it.
Do you think that there's some people complain that
One person.
You mean one person
We all
in
know who it was.
Well, in fairness, it is a bit of a movement, and he's obviously been adopted by a lot of people, where they talk
He's
about
got
PC.
albums to sell.
Yeah.
He doesn't mind if they're alt-right.
But he's not even good. That's the worst part about it.
He's completely missing the point of that scene. Sorry to interrupt, but that scene, if you listen to it, there's a guy who's from Scotland, there's someone who's Irish, there's someone who's a Cockney. The whole point of that scene was trying to show the diversity of people who fought during the war. Now, if you're going to have such a literal approach to that scene and not actually see the metaphorical symbolism of, hey, everyone came together during
Or the
this great
historical
war. That just shows how little you understand of drama, And to be honest, if that went over your head, no wonder you're not getting cast in movies.
And it's
Sorry,
about the George
mate.
Mcconaughey character decompressing after a really, really horrendous experience. It's not about counting everyone who's in the truck, unless, of course, you're a certain person whose name I will not mention.
Yeah.
But how do you feel? I mean, there's a lot of talk about diversity in the Oscars and about how it needs to be more representative. Like, why does that matter? Like, as being devil's advocate, I could say, like, it should just be a meritocracy. It shouldn't be about sort of like being inclusive. Why can't the best person for the job win? Why does it matter?
Because we don't live it. That system doesn't exist.
We talk about meritocracy as though everyone's equal, but we're not. So if we're all starting at different levels, then how can it ever be a meritocracy?
Yeah.
And also, if our idea of what is good is whiteness, we're always going to see that as the best.
Also, it's a dangerous game as well because it's so open to interpretation in terms of meritocracy. I think, for example, Lorraine Scafaria should have been nominated for Best Director for Hustlers. She did an incredible job in that film. I've said this before, but Todd Phillips is nominated for Joker. He's essentially doing a bad Martin Scorsese impression in that film. He gets nominated. Lorraine Scafaria is doing a good Martin Scorsese impression with Hustlers, doesn't get nominated, gets overlooked. So I don't necessarily think, I think that the idea of a meritocracy, for me, she was head and shoulders above everyone else. It doesn't really work.
Because we talk about diversity, and it's not. We have to, remember that diversity is not just race. It's obviously gender. It's intersectional.
Class as well.
Class as well. How Issa Rae said, "Congratulations to all the men." Is that what she said?
She said, "Congratulations to those men."
To those men, exactly. And this is the second year in a row I think this has happened, if I'm correct. And it just kind of, as someone, I'm not part of the film world, but when I see all of these nominations roll out, I just think, do we still live in a world where we just don't see women as directors? And I think that's the kind of message it gives out. Even if it's not intended, even if all those films were amazing and I don't think we should be looking at the men who were nominated and say, well, no, they weren't good enough. It's just, why can't we see the women on par as good?
Why aren't they considered geniuses?
Exactly.
They're not to us. I think also, the fact is we live in a world where 50% of the population are women. And you see these kind of statistics coming through from USC Annenberg Initiative who basically say, last year it was the most women who's ever directed movies. It's like, great, but that was still like, 20-something, like a very low figure in comparison. You look at the women, how many women who have directed a movie where the budget is over 200 million, right? 4 women. So Ava DuVernay, Nikki Caro, Catherine Bigelow. I don't think Catherine Bigelow is she twice or Ava's twice or someone else?
In terms of budgets over 200 million?
Yeah, 20 million.
I don't think Catherine Bigelow's even been near a budget that
she
big
was,
in
I
her
think it was
career.
K9 Widowmaker. I think she got. That
She was,
was
that was the one chance she gets as well. And that's the thing about female filmmakers as well. They get one chance. And if they mess it up, they don't get back in again for years and years. Look at Patty Jenkins with Monster. She makes Monster in 2003. Gives Charlize Theron an Oscar for it. Doesn't make a movie again until Wonder Woman in 2017.
Deborah Granick, perfect example where Winter Bones really celebrated and then Leave No Traces later on. I mean, it's just frustrating when you see people like Guy Ritchie. I'm not saying like he's a bad director, but like he's.
I think that's what you're saying.
No, but what I'm saying, I don't think he's a bad director. I think he's made some bad movies, but I still stand. I think Lock, Stock, Snatch, they hold up, right? But the fact is, he's had a lot of flops back to back, and then he gets Aladdin.
Sometimes twice in a year.
and then he gets Aladdin.
Yeah.
And then you're like, how is that possible? And I think Ava DuVernay said this. She's actually pointed him out. It's like, I can't afford to make a flop. I don't get a chance. Do you think Ava DuVernay is going to get to do another Wrinkle in Time because of that? Well, I just don't think she will get an opportunity to make that level.
Yeah, she's interesting because she's got this DC New Gods project. So she actually has... Wrinkle in Time didn't do that well, and she still managed to... Because she's got this wonderful reputation. But there are other directors like Mimi Leader who made The Peacemaker,
Very
then made
Lambert.
Deep Impact, then made Paid Forward, one of the most famous bombs in Hollywood history. Again, took years to get back on. Mary Lambert's another one, absolutely. It's kind of crazy the way that it's so easy to put female filmmakers into.
I mean, look at Lynn
director
Ramsey
jail.
is a perfect.
Yeah.
She's been in director jail for ages because she's seen as a difficult, problematic person. It's like, how many problematic male directors are there out there who basically cause issue on set? I mean, people are still working with Roman Polanski, and it's like Lynn Ramsey can't get, has to work her hardest, even though You Were Never Really Here is probably one of the greatest movies, probably one of Joaquin Phoenix's best performances ever. But where are people lining up to work with her again? Or, just there's different rules, and it's never on an even footing. And until we have some actual proper leadership change at the top, at these studios, at distributors, it's never going to change. Because until we need the trickle-down thing, because unless you have people making change at the top, it's never going to happen.
Exactly, and also if you don't have that representation, people of colour who want to get into that industry will think, well, look at the nominations this year. I don't feel like I'm wanted in this industry. It's not that they're trying to get the validation from the Oscars, because if you also look at the Oscars voting body, it's overwhelmingly white and male. But when you have award seasons and you see the very white and the very male nominations, you do just get the message, your talent is not wanted here.
I think it's very telling that on the Oscars that Cynthia Erivo got nominated, right? Think about all the other women who've been nominated in that character. You go Scarlett Johansson, Marriage Story, and you have Bombshell, you have Little Women, you have all these different movies that's so diverse, and then Cynthia Erivo is nominated for Playing a Slave. And that is consistent at the Oscars. There are only certain types of movies that Oscars voters deem worthy enough. I think there's been 36 black women nominated for the Oscars, and at least 2/3 of those roles, they're either playing slaves, maids, or people in blue-collar work, or poor people, right? What does that say about what is accepted? Dolomite Is My Name is a phenomenal comedy, period comedy. Why didn't Eddie Murphy, there's probably lots of reasons why they don't get nominated, but how is that not getting nominated when...
Yeah, Ruthie Carter didn't get nominated for that, for Best Costume. Look at that, those costumes are phenomenal.
Yeah.
Whereas Joker, buy your purple jacket, there you go, and you get a nomination. It's crazy, but the Oscars has sadly never been a meritocracy. How many times have you said when something wins Best Picture, you go, well, that's clearly not the... Look at Green Book. Green Book last year won Best Picture. Clearly not the best picture that came out that week. Never mind that year.
It's a film about race that makes white people feel good about themselves.
Yeah.
It made me feel very good about myself. It made me feel great about myself.
It's basically saying that racism is solved.
Yeah.
It's done.
I've got a black friend.
It's
done.
Yeah.
Yay. Next issue.
So I have a question. When I was looking at all the nominations, why do all the same 10 films come up in every single nomination?
It's the hurt mentality.
Because it's the only ones that they watch. Yeah, and there's also kind of campaigns. Joker had a ridiculous campaign, didn't it? They basically did all these screenings. They did Q&A. So in Academy, what they'll do when it comes to Academy and both BAFTA is that the studios will put on special screenings for members to come see it, and then they'll bring down the cast. For 1917, one member told me that for BAFTA, they did a Q&A with Sam Mendes, George Mackay, and Benedict Cumberbatch.
Wow.
Benedict Cumberbatch is in it for one scene, 1 minute, but members are like, oh, we'll go to that screening. It was packed.
Very nice.
And even and even Benedict was really awkward being there because he's like,
I'm on stage longer than I
also,
was.
spoiler alert, I'm in the movie.
No spoiler if you've seen the TV spots or the trailers, by the way.
But there's a thing, they put on this massive campaign, they get loads, they can send out more DVDs as well, because obviously it costs money to send out actual screeners. People would rather we still live in a way that people would rather put a DVD or a Blu-ray into a machine than watch it online and there's a screener links. So that's a massive part of it. And if you're coming from these big studios, like Netflix knew that the ones that they were pushing is The Irishman. That was going to be their one. Even though they had Uncut Gems and Dolomite and stuff, I don't think they tried as hard with those other films. They pick one that they're going to do a campaign around, and then that's it.
Release dates also help as well. It's a bit of a shorthand.
Yeah.
If your movie gets released March, April, May, and forget it if you're released in the summer months.
Us? What's that
Pretty
movie?
much. Yeah. What is us? Because literally, Lupita Nyong'o, for my money, gave the best performance of any actress last year.
She performed 2 different roles, and yet Scarlett Johansson was nominated twice.
Margot Robbie twice in the same category. That ruined it for her, actually. Same when Amy Adams got nominated twice. It splits the vote. So you end up like,
You're
you know,
done.
you're done. You're never going to win it. Yeah, it's annoying. I think you're right, because actually also 1917 came out November.
Just in
Just
the
in the right amount
time.
of
The
time.
print was still wet. Do people have prints these days? I don't know. But whatever it was still wet. And that immediately puts it into people's minds.
Yeah.
Whereas something like an Us or
When was
an
Us
Avengers
released?
Endgame, it doesn't even get any conversation.
Us was
Beginning of the year,
February.
yeah.
I think that's the thing as well. It's like you've got that 2-month window where people have got to watch these movies and
Yeah.
they've got long lists and do it.
And they're really old.
Yeah, and also...
Really old.
But I think also people aren't going to re-watch movies that they saw already. They'll remember the performance. It's like, oh, OK. But what's fresh in their mind? And also, again, they're going to just pick names that they recognise.
The Peter's performance was so good that you would, if you watched that film, you would remember
For
how
me,
good
but
the
it's a
Peter
horror
was...
film.
I didn't like... Yeah, also
It's a horror
horrors.
film.
Yeah.
The
Oh, is
Academy
that-
is so snobbish
Yeah.
about comedy. It is so snobbish about horror
Was
films.
it really a horror film? Because I'm squeamish and I wasn't really scared.
Or you could do what they call a social thriller. No, it's definitely a horror movie.
Yeah, it's like a
I
psychological
mean,
horror.
you obviously are very hard, and you're hard.
No, because I don't know.
You're going to love the last 10 minutes of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah, loves
It'll be
it.
great for you.
I think there's Academy loves anything that's about themselves, Hollywood, like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So like Judy, Renee Zellweger's got nominated. She's playing Judy Garland, the ultimate Hollywood figure. So I think that's kind of works against you. Also, war movies, especially in Britain, anything that's like heroic British film, it's like, yes, let's nominate this film. Look at our boys go. So yeah. That's my
Yeah.
You mentioned Lupita. Is there any other major snubs that you're irate about?
Well. Here we go.
Jennifer Lopez.
That's it.
Yep.
That's
Oh
the
my
one.
God, I wanted to scream when she didn't get nominations. It's a career best performance. And it's annoying because people say about Brad Pitt, oh, he's playing himself. It's like, well, at least he got nominated. Jennifer Lopez not getting anything at the Oscars or BAFTAs is just peak discrimination, to
Do
be honest.
people not take
in
her
so many different
seriously
ways.
because she's essentially a celebrity?
Yeah,
think that's
that is a
singer.
massive part of it. I think
Yeah.
that's a massive part of it. I think it's a film that...
She's not one of them.
Yeah, I think, you compare her to Matthew McConaughey, who, they both had a history of doing rom-coms, right? Matthew McConaughey goes away until Jeff Nichols or Richard Linklater comes with, what is it called? What's that? Bernie movie,
yeah,
and then
Bernie
he did
movie.
Mud.
That's what it's called.
Did the Bernie movie?
The Bernie movie.
He goes away for a few years. What do ever men do? Goes to the woods, finds himself, blah blah blah.
Mainly naked bongos.
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
He loves the naked
he's like
bongos.
he's on the go. Anyway, and then Jennifer Lopez, obviously she did loads of rom-coms as well, but then during that period when she kind of her quality of work, like remember she did Selena, Outside, amazing movie, U-Turn, like she's an amazing actress and people forget that because she's also a phenomenal performer and she brought out 2 platinum-selling albums in the early noughties and it's like she's done amazingly. She didn't rest on her laurels. She hustled because she realised she's a woman of colour. The roles that McConaughey was getting offered after his little break, there aren't roles for Latino women as much as they are for white men of a certain age. Do you know what I mean? They're
She's
not
basically
there.
had 2 really successful careers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And people can't see that.
Yeah.
They're just like, well, no, because there's been 2, she's obviously hasn't put 100% energy.
But you don't say that
into-
about Barbara Streisand. You don't say that about Frank Sinatra, Elvis, these are great. There was a time when actually having all these, like Gene Kelly, there was a time when being a singer and a dancer and an actor was like prerequisites to making movies. She is that modern equivalent, right? And also, like, we get back, my Matthew McConaughey comparison is going to serve me well, this talk. But again, when he did Dallas Buyers Clubs, right, he's playing this hustler who... for that role, he has his body transformation. Like, literally, as we've seen from the Oscars, if you lose a lot of weight, suddenly it's like, wow, he really sacrificed for his art. Really, really sacrificed there. Look, Christian Bale did it. Who else has done it? Tom Hanks,
Tom Hanks,
all
De
these
Niro.
things. Yeah, all lose weight for the thing. Jennifer Lopez learns how to pole dance to a point where she does the Pepsi halftime show, and she's literally climbed up this thing to the top of it. I mean, you look at Hustlers, and it's probably one of the best introductions to characters ever. It's phenomenal. She put so many hours into that, like hundreds of hours into that performance to learn how to do it, to be the best at what she could do. Why is that not more of not a same amount of achievement?
That is a skill.
It is.
If anything, like
I've tried pole dancing. It's really hard.
I think I should.
I think you should, because I think everyone just tried pole dancing.
everyone should try it, and then they'll see how hard it is.
I did try it. It's really hard. I still have bruises on my legs, and it was 2 weeks ago. Forget about that. Forget about the pole dancing bit. If you're watching Hustlers, the character development of Ramona throughout it, it just gets you in the heart, and you realise she's from. She just kind of pulls the layers back of this character to understand who this person is. And if you're ignoring that and think that that's not deserving of an Oscar, I just think, what does she have to do?
What do you think?
What does she actually have to do?
She needed to cry. She needed to properly cry, have a great big shrieking fit of history on it.
Oh my God, Tropic Thunder
you
over
need
it.
the Oscar. Genuinely, that's what you need to do. You need the Oscar clip.
Yeah.
Which is one of my... It's why it's surprising that Brad Pitt has been nominated and will win for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, because that is absolutely a study in minimalism, and he doesn't cry and he doesn't have the big Oscar clip moment. But by and large, you look at all these performers who are nominated, that's what they will have. And that's the one flaw, the one thing that was missing from that performance. She needed to squirt a few, and sadly it didn't happen.
In terms of a good news story that's come out of the Oscars, it's Parasite. Everyone's raving about it. It's really positive that a foreign language film has broken through. What is it, particularly about Parasite, that's managed to break through into the mainstream?
That's a good question. I also feel... I'm not sure if this is a breakthrough until it happens again.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens next year. I feel there's an element, as with my presence on this panel today, of box ticking a little bit, and they feel good about themselves because we've nominated the foreign film. We've nominated the film from South Korea. Aren't we great? It's a tremendous film, but Bong Joon-ho is a tremendous filmmaker, and you could argue that some of his previous movies, like it's a genre film, but The Host or Snowpiercer, could easily and equally should have been in the conversation as well. I don't really know what it is about Parasite that has clicked with people, if I'm honest with you.
If somebody would describe themselves as never having watched a foreign film and is not interested in subtitles, how would you sell it to them?
Oh my God.
Black comedy, and kind of like a home invasion type element of it that deals with the kind of upstairs, downstairs elements of class culture, really. I think the reason why Parasite's broken through... Sold? You're going to go see it? Go see it. In cinemas now.
Sounds great. Is there a Joker in it?
Yeah.
I'm excited.
I actually think the reason why it's broken through, and I think it's happened a lot now because of the rise of social media, is, and especially how film, Twitter, and beyond that, especially on festivals, the reaction straight away.
Yeah.
I think... did it screen at Cannes? Is that where it first screened?
No, it screened, I think, in Toronto.
Toronto?
Yeah.
Oh,
it's quite late in the day, this one.
I think, because it was September.
Yeah.
But I think the reaction from that, it was unanimous.
Yeah.
And then there was memeable moments. People were talking about it in such a positive way that you couldn't ignore it. I mean, I only saw this movie last week, and I was like, I'm really happy that I'm finally going to get all the references that people have been talking about on Twitter.
But did you also have a sense of, this can't possibly live up to the hype?
Right.
And then...
Yeah, but
did it for you? Okay,
it 100% did. But I think people, especially who are Academy members or from both Oscars and BAFTAs, are going to take notice of this. I think it's an accessible Korean film compared to something like last year's Burning, which is actually phenomenal, but it's very slow burning.
Yeah.
Slow burning.
Yeah.
It's very cerebral. Kind of. There's not a lot of specific action going on, whereas this film, because of the comedic elements, because it's slightly thriller, because of the relatable elements of it, it's more accessible to Western audiences. So I think that's probably why people were going to do it. And also, it's like, again, the promotion of this movie, I think Bong has been all over the place.
Oh yeah, and there's such a wave of love for him as well. It's extraordinary. There's a real cult
Bong
personality.
And the way
Absolutely.
he's reacted as well in a lot of situations.
Yeah.
But and yet it's been praised, and yet none of the... It's not had an Oscar. It's not had an actor nomination.
The cast, no.
Yeah.
And it's the same with like Farewell. Was phenomenal. And that's not had a look in.
Awkwafina, I think, was actually a bit of a shock for me as well, as she wasn't nominated.
Is it? I mean, again, does it go back to this thing of like representation and young sort of Asian actors that they won't have that role model because they're not nominated?
I think with the Farewell, it's actually more about... I don't think people watched it. I don't think BAFTA... Because there's, like we were saying earlier, like I think there's certain films that I don't really understand how anyone could watch this movie not like Waves didn't get nominated. I just don't. I don't think the campaign around The Farewell was as strong. Also, it was released much earlier. But I think with Parasite, I think there's an element of they're not recognisable names who these actors. You know, apart from you compare it to like Roma last year, but that's Alfonso Cuarón. So it's like Yalitza getting nominated was people were making a point because actually that was this one performance that stood out. If you look at, I mean, the fact that Parasite won the SAG Award for Best Ensemble Cast, I think actually with that movie, it was an ensemble performance. I would love if these awards shows, actually, the Oscars and BAFTAs did an ensemble award, because I think, something like Spotlight a while ago, that was a great movie, but there was no I mean, I know Mark Ruffalo and Rachel McAdams got nominated, but I don't think they did anything. I think it was actually the whole cast coming together that really works. And I think with Parasite, I don't think it's easily identifiable who was the standout character.
You can't say, oh, he was the best or she was the best. It was the whole film and the whole cast together. Yeah, and I think compare that to like, well, Once Upon a Time, it was so obviously like a buddy movie. So they're both, they were specifically, you know exactly who you're focusing on. And also it's Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio. Like, you know, these recognised names, but, you know, you're looking at a list and do you think back to Parasite? You say, I love this as a film. Oh, I love the way it was directed. What's the name of the character again? Same with, like, Farewell, you know, is it Xiao Zhu-Chen, who's the grandma in it?
Oh, she's so great.
She's phenomenal, but again, you know, not recognisable names. And I think that goes back to the point of membership, diversifying membership, clearing out some of the old white dudes and bringing in new names who are actually kind of looking for stories that aren't the same.
As John Goodman says in Arachnophobia, take out old wood, put in new wood. That's what I say. Quote John Goodman any time you can. But it's interesting. For example, in this country,
I couldn't go to the loo for a very long time without looking under the seat after watching Arachnophobia.
I still can't. But Denzel Washington, for example, has never been nominated for a BAFTA. And I wonder if that speaks to the makeup of the membership of BAFTA and things need to change. And again, going back to something I said earlier on, the Academy in the States are taking steps, I think, to do that. Every year they're inviting a younger and more diverse group of new members into the Academy, and that's great. But again, it's going to take time because you have all these old, atrophied people who have been in the Academy for years and years and years because of something they did in the 60s and 70s, and they have lifetime membership. So maybe they should look at jazzing it up a little bit. I think they are. I think someone has floated the idea that maybe you have to have a credit in the last 5 years if you're an actor or something like that. So you can't be a retiree necessarily.
So with the Academy, they've made a new thing where if you can have membership for 10 years, and after 10 years, if you haven't made anything that time, you can still be a member, but you don't have voting privileges. I think it goes, and then after 30 years, I think, you know, again, it kind of keeps going. But if you've won an Academy Award, obviously you can vote forever because, you know, you get that luxury. But again, when you think about most people who've won Academy Awards...
Well, it's true. It's true.
I think there's some things, like when I spoke to some BAFTA members, some of the kind of ways it could help out is unconscious bias training. Try and make sure that every person, before they actually vote, actually goes through it. I think BIFA does it before people vote on that one.
They have a security guard who goes around and stands over you and makes sure that you're watching the film. Are you enjoying it?
Yeah.
Enjoy it.
Yeah.
There's a bit of the dog can coming up. I don't want to ruin it for you, but it's good.
I think it's also good to have transparency about what films people are watching. I think every time that you watch a movie, you need to have a tick to your name so we can count it all up and work out what people are watching. Because again, like we're saying, like how did... Even films like Uncut Gems, for me, I know it's a very white movie, but like that is a phenomenal film. The idea that they can get anything, or even The Lighthouse. Again, it's so good. Lighthouse is out in cinemas, Uncut Gems on Netflix.
but it's interesting that Edgar Wright tweeted something like he's going to make sure he watches all.
He watched all of them.
But like that was praised, and you kind of think that's the basic level that you're supposed to do as a member.
But also it's hard to watch. I mean, we watch movies for a living, and sometimes it's actually hard to watch that many because you've got other things to do work. I mean, if you're a retiree...
And I actively don't like movies. Which doesn't help either, really. But it's true. But you copy... As a kid, you would just copy off the kid next to you. And I think a lot of that happens here. It's like, oh, I haven't had time to see that Joker film. Is he good?
What did you think?
He's good. Oh, he's good? OK, I'll vote for him then, because it's so much easier than watching, an Adam Sandler movie? I didn't like... I like that murder mystery one. What was it called? But not this one. No, I'm not going for that.
Murder Mystery 2, coming soon to Netflix.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. We'll be talking about that in the Oscars. back in 2 years' time.
In terms of films that more people do need to see, I know you're very passionate about For Summer.
Yeah, so I had the chance to see it actually months ago at a preview, and I don't think I've ever cried so much. Like, I honestly couldn't stop crying, and I was just trying to look around, like, was anyone else crying as much? And everyone was in tears. It was really, like, you know, I didn't even have tissues on me because I was just trying to watch the film and, like, my contacts were going. But, yeah, it was just phenomenal. I mean, I haven't seen any of the other documentaries in the category, and I think there is another one that's actually about the Syrian war and the female doctors who are currently there, and so I haven't seen that one. So it's really fascinating. There are 2 Syrian war documentaries, but just with that one, I think what was so incredible about it was that, you know, it's an extension to journalism, right?
Yeah.
A documentary. And I think with a lot of documentaries as well, that, you know, you plan them and you think, OK, this is what I'm going to do, blah, blah, blah. I mean, obviously, I don't know how, I've never done a documentary, but I imagine that's how they're planned ahead. With this one, you know, a war starts and she just starts filming and there isn't really a plan. And the whole time you watch it and you just don't know if they're going to make it. God, it was just so heartbreaking. And so, because I think, you know, you hear about Syria and obviously you read about it and you know about the atrocities that go on, but your mind never quite takes you to the extent of the horror that is actually there. And then you just see it all unfiltered. And I think especially for me, like, you know, just... Sorry, I'm getting really into it, but I don't want to give anything away, obviously, but... you know, when you just see the, you know, the sheer amount of children that are there and just their innocence, and you're just like, oh my God, like this could happen anywhere. And I just think it's one of those films that it's one of those documentaries that everyone should see.
I suppose that's the thing. I mean, you started off talking about your emotion, but that's the thing. Like, there's lots of worthy subjects, but great filmmaking has an impact. It makes you feel something, and that's what For Summer does.
Yeah. I interviewed Wad Al-Khatib, and actually I felt such an idiot. But when I was talking about it to her, I started crying. I was like, oh my God, the Western tears coming through. Like, she's literally lived it and I can't even ask a question. It's the same. I just think it's these stories, what we're talking about, the diversity of stories and understanding the world. I mean, that was one of my top 10 movies of last year. I know Capernaum was considered in a previous one, but Nadine Labaki, that was a fiction narrative, and that's about a child who has no record or papers of his existence, wants to sue his parents for bringing him into the world, and it's like in Lebanon, and it just grabs you and gets you, and that's the power of cinema, isn't it? It makes you feel, it makes you understand what's going on in the world, and I just think if we're constantly seeing the same stories, how are we supposed to learn and progress? How are we supposed to kind of get a better understanding of certain situations? Like, I think one of my favourite movies, talking about kind of Syria and like the Middle East and like rising kind of our distrust of people who are Muslim or Arab. Sons of Denmark was a phenomenal film that focused on the rise in both white terrorism and Islamic terrorism set. I think it's Sons of Denmark, obviously. But what's the name? Netherlands. That's the trick question, though. But it kind of did it in such a nuanced way, and I think it's Ula Salim who was the director of it. And it was the best conversation. It was also quite Shakespearean in its delivery. It was just so phenomenal, the way it kind of had this first act and the second act. And I think that's what's so important, and I love those stories coming through. And I want to see more of them. We shouldn't stop. I don't want it to be just that documentary or that film, and it's one time we get to see it.
I haven't seen that.
And why
a good recommendation.
Is it only
I'll write that down.
limited to the documentary category? Why can't it be?
Well, those two are fiction. The Capernaum and Sons of Denmark is not. But
I'm talking about For Summer.
Yeah. Well, I think they can.
The only thing it could be up for Best Picture if we wanted to. I mean, I suppose that's the problem.
It was nominated for Best British Film. This year, was it not? For BAFTAs?
I believe it was, yeah.
But this is the problem. Like there's been a lot of talk about one way of being more inclusive is to have separate categories. But surely the problem with that is it almost ghettoises those categories.
Yeah, it absolutely does.
So if there's a documentary category, it's less likely that'll be up for Best Picture.
I would be stunned if they ever nominated a documentary, no matter how good it is, for Best Picture.
I mean, it's interesting that The Farewell was in a foreign language. But I'm pretty sure Inglourious Basterds was nominated and it has the same amount. Like, that's technically, most of that is in a foreign language.
A lot, yeah.
So again, it's this kind of prejudice. I mean, speaking of like Capernaum, which has won, I think it won the Best Director or something at the Cannes Film Festival when it came out. And Nadine Labaki, it's just a phenomenal film that literally got rave reviews. But then Roma, which is again also in a foreign language, but that gets nominated for Best Film and that Best Director. Where's Nadine Labaki's nomination? Why is that only restricted to foreign language?
But that also speaks to the Academy's fixation with reputation.
Yeah.
You could argue, I mean, you know, I know a lot of people who love The Irishman, but I feel that it's maybe Scorsese slightly reheating elements from his past. But he's been nominated because he's Martin Scorsese.
Yeah.
Quentin Tarantino, great film, but you could argue he's been nominated because he's Quentin Tarantino. And they love these big names. They love these names that they've nominated in the past and they're friendly to. Cuarón is one of those with Roma. It's why Meryl Streep's been nominated year on year on year. I'm amazed she wasn't nominated this year, even though she was only in The Laundromat. But I'm sure they would have found a way. And Little Women, of course, yeah. She's nominated for... Where's Meryl's nomination?
Honestly, it's outrageous.
Damn it, I'm furious now.
Absolutely outrageous.
In terms of reputation and how things are perceived, Marvel, like, should that have been in the Endgame? Should it have been in the conversation?
Roll my sleeves up even further, Noz.
Go on,
Here we go.
Here's your platform.
I feel that Endgame should have been nominated for Best Picture. Not least because I am wearing Kevin Feige underpants. And, you know, Hannah's literally wearing a Disney shirt here.
I'm a shell. Please invite me to all your screenings in Star Wars Celebration.
Everyone's been bought.
You know what?
So up for sale.
I am such a massive... I think we're saying we're like super Marvel nerds, love everything, love comic book movies. I think the only thing that should be nominated... I don't think it should have got acting nominations or directing nominations, considering how those movies are made, and as much as I think the Russos have done a good job, they do give a lot of it to other people to direct. You know, I think like there's a lot of elements to it.
Different units and all sorts of stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
As a Best Picture, though, it 100% should have been nominated, like in every little thing. Because if you think of what Feige did in this whole, I mean, compared to any other comic book franchise, the fact that they did something that's only kind of something you see in television. They weaved in all these narrative across all these films to come to a conclusion that was pretty damn satisfying. I just don't understand how that is not a great picture. Plus, it's made... Is it the most money ever?
It is. This is one of the reasons why I think it was... I thought it was going to be nominated purely because it is the biggest movie of all time.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that the Oscars loves more than a nice pat in the back, even if it doesn't win. But you look, for example... It hasn't happened that often in recent history, mainly because of James Cameron.
Yeah.
But Titanic becomes the biggest film of all time. Yes. But Titanic does it in 1997, 1998, gets 14 nominations, wins 11. Avatar becomes the biggest film of all time, 2009, gets 14 nominations and 11 Oscars. Return of the King, the Fellowship of the... Not the Fellowship of the King, the third one, the Return of the King, wins 11 Oscars because that was the victory lap for that franchise. And the Oscars were a way of saying... well done on this monumental achievement. And I thought that Endgame would get at least a nomination for that, for being the victory lap, for bringing it home, and for making, frankly, more money than any movie has ever made in history. Hasn't happened.
And I think that half of that is because there are so many Marvel movies out now. I think it's
There's
when you compare...
yeah,
I think, you know, you said Titanic, but it was the only kind of movie like that. Avatar's only movie like that, whereas not that there's loads, but like there's two every year. There's like 2 or 3 Marvel movies, so the market's really saturated. So in a way, they don't see it as standing on its own.
No, they don't.
And I think that's part of it. Whereas you compare that to Black Panther last year getting nominated because that was a film that defied anything that's been done before.
It was a landmark film, absolutely.
It was a landmark film.
Yeah.
Same with Logan. Probably one of... I absolutely adore that movie, and I love the comic book based on. And I think that did something totally different that we haven't seen with comics. I think that's half the reason why Joker's done well, because again, it's like, this isn't a comic book movie. This is actually something different. So I think that's why you have to do something that breaks the mold, whereas one of the major criticisms of Marvel films, it's the same movie pretty much every single time, which is kind of fair, but...
Well, I could do another hour on why that's wrong, but that's...
I mean, sure, but I mean, it's a fundamental... I mean, yes, in the most basic terms, you could say that because there's kind of like the hero and the... You know, let's save that for the next one. But again, I just think, like, Avengers Endgame has been tarred with an unfair, like, brush, I think.
It has,
yeah.
it has. And I think, genuinely, I think a major part of it as well is Scorsese's comments, which of course were made to Empire magazine in the first place.
Yeah.
So you are to blame.
We are to blame. Although I think it's such a bee in his bonnet, he would have said it to someone eventually. But
Nick didn't even bring it up, did he?
No.
He said
Nick, my friend and colleague Nick, brought up Marvel movies to Scorsese, but purely to talk about de-aging and how they do the de-aging process so well.
They use the same technology and the same people. Yeah.
Only much better. Which side of my mouth is the whisper side? I'm not sure. But he said what he said about Marvel movies not being cinema, and I think it it gave people a lot of leeway to suddenly punish Marvel, and to basically hide behind that once again.
I mean, would you not, if you flip that and look at The Irishman and other films, Netflix, is that a force for good in cinema, or is that taking cinema away from this communal thing and putting it into like a small box that you watch it?
It's
7 inches wide.
It's absolutely, mostly, a force for absolute good.
Right.
Yeah, I also think, if you look at the history of kind of cinema, like the reason why you had movie theatres in the first place is because no one had TVs. Everyone had to have that communal experience to do it. It wasn't about, and also cinema was considered very kitsch, like it was seen as lowbrow culture, and actually it wasn't really art, like back in the day, you know. But then now you look at like the golden age of cinema and think, oh my God, the movies, all these musical movies were considered then, oh, this is very gauche. And now it's like, oh my God, these are the greatest films ever. So I think you have to remember there's a progress of like avant-garde and kitsch is constantly changing. I think, to be honest, in a few years' time, we'll be looking at like the Marvel films, and say that was actually what they did there was actually groundbreaking cinema.
Golden age of blockbusters.
Yeah,
as far as
golden
I'm
age of
concerned.
blockbusters. So I think actually what Netflix is doing is bringing it back to kind of making cinema for everyone. Now we look at the rising cinema prices, and also like movie lengths are really long now. I'm not saying, but I know they've been quite long, but.
Even Marriage Story is like 2 hours plus, isn't
everything.
it? Everything.
Honestly, 90-minute movies is my sexual preference. Like, I love a night. Like, if you've got me a 90-minute movie, I'm in. I'm down. I'm great. It's going to be great. But nowadays, everything's so long. Someone said something really funny, actually. They said, if Marvel movies are the theme park, then The Irishman is the queue. And I thought, actually...
Shots fired.
Gabriel Bissett-Smith, that was actually a really good thing, so I want to quote you and make sure that. So.
That is fantastic.
And I thought that's actually a really good way of saying it. So it's like, you know, I think Netflix is doing great, and obviously they're doing far more for diverse productions. I mean, think about all the stuff that's being made. So I don't see this wrong. Also, people have families and got work to do, and it's not as easy to go to the cinema anymore. And it's a whole experience. You have to pay for, like, a babysitter, and then, you know, there's a whole element of it that it becomes very, you know, you can say, oh, which should be seen in cinema, but if you don't have as much money to do that on a regular basis, why not have Netflix? So
it definitely makes it more accessible, I think. As you said, from a financial perspective, but also, you know, having that ability to just sit down and watch something, and then, you know, you find out that it's been nominated for an Oscar, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's so cool, you know. When I saw that Marriage Story was nominated for some Oscars, I was just like, I've participated in something that is seen as like this high culture, and I think it almost breaks the barriers between, because, you know, when you think about the Oscars and you think about that whole entire world, you just feel so far removed from it as an average person. But, you know, if you're sharing a Netflix account with your family and you just decided to watch something one day, and suddenly it's, you know, it's being praised by like the highest authority within that sphere, you think, oh, cool, I'm part of that now. I mean,
I'm not saying you're the voice of a generation, but as the voice of a generation, how do you consume films? And is that same thing of like enjoying that communal sort of like experience of going to cinema, or is it more a case of just watching it on your phone?
If I'm honest, like growing up, I didn't watch that many films. I just didn't have the means to do that in terms of just like my time. It costs a lot of money. Also, the films that were there, I wasn't really interested in. I think growing up, it's now I'm starting to invest some of my time into watching films, because I've always seen it as like a something that you really have to commit to, you know, they are long. And also just films that interest me. And I think more and more, you are seeing amazing films being produced, you know, like Parasite, Us, Get Out was one of the best. I went to see that in the cinema, and it was just amazing. And when you see a film and you really get it, and you get the different layers of it, that's when you start getting into watching stuff like that. And I think with Netflix, and you said, you know, about the diversity, I love, you know, even not just the films, but the TV programs alone, like Sex Education, and so many other programs that are so diverse. You want to support a platform like that, right? And yeah, I just think the fact that they're on Netflix is just amazing.
You mentioned Sex Education. You've got things like Succession. You've got so many amazing TV shows with amazing scripts, and now stars are gravitating towards those. What is it about cinema that's still important or still relevant?
Chris, do you want to say this one?
Well, it's still a perception. It's the big dog, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the one that most people see. It's the one that most people talk about. It's the one that has the biggest paydays. You can make 20 million of a film. You can make 100 million of a film if you have back end points, like I presume Downey Jr. had on Endgame. You can't necessarily do it with TV. Although the thing that TV obviously has is the room to breathe.
Yeah.
But that can also be a negative in a way, because so many shows I'm watching these days are so flabby and have subplots for no reason whatsoever, other than they have to fill the time.
Yeah, I think films offer, well, mostly, now we're in franchise culture, that's not saying, but they offer complete stories. Like that's it, you watch it for 90 minutes, 2 hours, and that's the story, hopefully, unless it does really well, and then you're going to get 9 more movies.
And
Fast
that's
9.
an art. To do that is an art. To tell a complete story with characterizations in 90 minutes. Perfect.
Yeah. Whereas with TV, because, you know, they were going to do season 1, season 2. I mean, one of my biggest pet peeves, like you're saying, flabby, like American TV so often has 24 episodes in one season. It's just too much. But they're trying to get people to watch it, bring people in, advertisers, and that's what they're relying on. I also think, actually, TV is suddenly now taking more of a risk with this type of stories they're telling. I think, you know, I think some of the stories you get now of like, now having more Marvel stories or comic book stories or Legion, these things that you wouldn't normally see before. You have a bit of sci-fi, but it's very specific. You know, they're not really kind of experimental in that way. Everything's kind of, we want to get people to come back, and if it's too awkward, that's what I loved about the OA, and I was so sad about it cancelling. Just to stay with Netflix, by the way, they've cancelled, as much as they're doing well, they've cancelled a serious amount of female-run series, the OA, Tucker and Bertie, which were all critically acclaimed. So as much as it's doing well, it's also undercutting its own talent. So, but yeah, I just think cinema, you know, there's nothing like, you know, talking about communal experience. I mean, I grew up, my parents used to take me every weekend to Waterman's or Park Royal. Like, it was a massive treat at the end of the week, and that's why I love cinema, and I love the escapism of it, when all lights come down.
Absolutely.
You know, and you haven't got distractions from someone texting you on Twitter, live tweeting it, things. There is something about being in the cinema which is just so economic, and just the quality of it. We're all in there having the same good time.
Having that experience at the same time, whether it's a comedy and people are laughing around you and you've no idea what the hell they're laughing at, or a scary film and everyone's jumping at the same time, it's incredible. One of my, you know, watching Endgame, for example, for the first time, and a certain moment happens towards the end of the movie and everybody is just enwrapped. And you wouldn't get that if you were watching it on Netflix for the first time. When I said Netflix is a force for absolute good, what I meant by that is that they're giving Scorsese, Cuarón, great directors, you know, Noah Baumbach, people like that, they're giving them carte blanche to make movies that otherwise studios wouldn't touch, and that's why I think they're a force for good.
Brilliant. And just finally, one film that everyone should go and watch.
Last Black Man in San Francisco. It's phenomenal. I loved it. It's got the best use of Joni Mitchell I've ever heard in a movie.
Good call. Booksmart.
Booksmart, that's mine as well. Amazing. And
Oh God, I don't know.
for Summer?
Actually, yeah, for Summer.
Do it for Summer.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, we're off to a pole dancing lesson.
Yep. I'm going to make you watch me.
Alexa, play
Exactly.
Fiona Apple.
I'm going to turn you into incels if it's the last thing I do.